Hello, everybody, and welcome to FinTech Futures Sibos series. My name is Tyler Payth. I'm a reporter for FinTech Futures, and today I'm very, very happy to be joined by Jan Smith, the co-founder and managing director of KoreFusion. Jan, how are you today?
Hi, Tyler. Thanks. I'm doing well, and yourself? It's good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's fantastic to have you join us. We did a small interview with a member of your team back at Finovate Europe earlier this year. So it's really good to recap with you and with your company just on sort of the eve of Sibos, which starts very soon this month, and we're all very excited. So I'm going to hand it over to you. Obviously, I've mentioned our previous work with KoreFusion, and for those viewers who would be interested in sort of catching up on that initial conversation, I'd really recommend that they go and source it out at fintechfutures.com. But while I've got you here, the managing director and co-founder of KoreFusion, can you tell us exactly what the company is, what markets it's active in, where it's active in terms of countries and location? Give us a rundown.
Sure. Thank you, Tyler. Yes. Well, KoreFusion has been around for almost 12 years, although the team has been in payments, at least the senior team, and including myself, over 25 years. And what we do is strategy in payments, and we also have an M&A advisory firm. And again, exclusively in payments and financial services. And we do this internationally. We have teams in Europe, in Berlin. We have teams in the United States, in San Francisco, New York, in Latin America, between Sao Paulo and Brazil and Mexico City. We're also in India, and we're also in Singapore. And lastly, we're also in Dubai, and have a small team also in Nairobi. So have quite the international footprint. And with that, what we do is we serve all sorts of companies in the fintech and payment space, from card networks, payment processors, merchant acquirers, large banks as well, and of course fintechs. And a lot of what we do is cross-border, and hence we're going to be at Sibos as well, and understanding both the latest trends, but also being in the trenches and seeing them happen in real time with our clients and advising on that strategy.
That's really fascinating. Thank you for that quick rundown of what KoreFusion is all about. I've spoken to a couple of industry leaders like yourself just in the eve of Sibos 2024 happening in Beijing this year, and they all agree among them that cross-border payments are going to be a massive theme and focus for this year's event. You mentioned, of course, the role of fintechs in driving those advances and in driving those payment capabilities. What impact do you think that the fintechs have had on this space to date?
I think the impact of the fintechs has been first and foremost to drive the costs, the actual costs of sending remittances, be they consumer remittances or business remittances, down. And we've already seen that over the last few years, a downward trend in terms of the costs and the beginning of passing those savings on to the end user. So I think that's the biggest effect that we've had. The second one, I think, has been punching above its weight and much more maybe noise, but in a positive sense, in terms of what the future is going to herald and what improvements we're going to have there. And the improvements that we've seen have been improvements in terms of settlement speed, transparency, in many ways being both a complement but also a substitute to the traditional correspondence model that has been using SWIFT technology and messaging. So that's the other effect. And lastly, I think it's precisely this type of competition which is driving itself innovation and improvement with existing standards. So I think it's a win-win for everyone. What we haven't seen, though, is a real move of global volumes to fintechs and they holding that. As loud as some of them have been, as successful and as efficient as their models have been, I think we're still dealing with less than 15% of global market share is what they hold. That's still significant. That's considering the amount of time they've been around, but it's still a minority share. So I think in that sense, banks and the traditional models are quite here to stay and will be entrenched for some time.
That's a really, really interesting answer, Jan. I completely agree with you in sort of the battle for the market share in cross-border payments. You mentioned, two really important factors, which is the speed and transparency of remittances of these cross-border payments. And KoreFusion is, of course, active in a lot of emerging markets where these qualities are actually more important than they would be in more established markets. We'll get onto that a little bit later. And you touched on a little bit on my next question for you in one of your previous answers. But do you think that there are any trends in this cross-border space that are currently being overlooked?
Well, actually, as you mentioned, frontier markets and developing markets, I think that's actually a trend that is being overlooked right now. These options are getting more cost efficient for implementation. They're being run on the back of APIs. We can think of it more and more as an out-of-the-box solution, and so that makes it much easier for a smaller bank, even a corporate and business player to lean into and adopt these solutions, either as direct users or have them as a white label in the background. And we're seeing enormous interest in frontier markets. We actually just recently finished some work in both Libya and South Africa. And we saw that there was interest from the banks in adopting these solutions, where 2-3 years ago it was just too prohibitive. And also the tech teams were not savvy enough, we could say, to do this. So there's definitely that happening under the water. The other trends I think that are flying a little bit under the water, or at least being dismissed by many players, is the integration of real-time payments, domestic payments, across different countries or by region. And this will create regional cross-border hubs themselves once we have enough connectivity. That's, I think, happening faster than many want to acknowledge, but probably not as fast as those who are involved in making it happen want it to happen. But I think that's one trend we should keep an eye out for in the next 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you there. We've got a lot of real-time payment systems sort of coming through in really interesting markets like South America, where KoreFusion has been active for some time now. And yeah, I agree with you in the fact that this is going to cultivate sort of domestic hubs in these markets, and this technology is obviously going to play an increasingly important role within completing cross-border payments and making them possible for those that need to complete them. If we maybe look beyond this to other technologies, we see things like cryptocurrencies or central bank digital currencies. Sort of, I don't want to say they're taking off, but they are coming increasingally to the forefront. We see the European Central Bank is slowly, progressing on with its own project. We have the Federal Reserve is also looking at possibilities in central bank digital currencies. Do you think that this is something that we can expect to see more of in the future? Do you think this is hype that we should believe in now?
Oh, we're definitely going to see more of it. But I see it as a two-edged sword, because if we move too quickly with it, we risk antagonizing both established players such as banks, who are going to be key in adopting this and use it, but also regulators. And even these other cross-border networks that we have been talking about, I think there's room for them in terms of real time to carve out a use case or consideration for cryptocurrencies, and in particular stable coins. So, in Asia, Nexus or Buna Nafak in the Middle East. What we've seen, and this actually builds on some work we've done in Eastern Africa, is there's been a desire to move with cryptocurrencies and stable coins much faster than regulators. And there's a frustration that the regulator is not giving clear guidelines and creating friendlier environments within which innovation for cryptocurrencies can be developed. And so it's been a market-led initiative. However, it's until recently, we've sensed at least a market initiative that is looking to be a substitute to SWIFT, to correspondent banking, to alternative ACH networks, rather than a coexistence. And we think that there needs to be room for coexistence here. Certain use cases will benefit from cryptocurrencies. I think particularly end users, and SMEs will benefit from this. But a lot remains to be established. The resilience of the systems, attesting in large scale. These are aspects which have regulators and the ecosystem duly worried about, and we need to make sure that the players that are involved in that space are working hand in hand with these regulators and educating them. And I say educating because many of the regulators that we've spoken to, and not just in Africa but globally, have very often a limited understanding of cryptocurrencies, of stable coins. There's a lot of fear in terms of what has happened recently, in terms of Bitcoin and the fluctuations and the valuations, and a lot of the irresponsibility by some of the larger players that we've also seen make headlines there. So there really needs to be some technocrat there taking people by the hand and educating them. And in that sense, I think what's happened in Japan very recently is quite interesting, where the regulator has been responsible, has been moving to integrate cryptocurrencies, is going to have interoperability of cryptocurrencies and platforms, and have multiple stablecoin currencies there as well. And that really opens it up, and looking at it first and foremost for businesses rather than consumers. So there is a path and a light at the end of a tunnel, and we're going to see more and more of it. I think we're in the early days. But is it going to be something that completely substitutes? No, it's going to be something that coexists and is going to be applicable to certain use cases and for certain players.
I think that interoperability element that you were mentioning in your answer is really key to making this technology slot in where it needs to be. And again, when you talk about the regulation that needs to go behind this technology in order to support its effective use, I think this is really a calling for not only regulators to listen to those in the industry and those that are experts in this space, but also for those experts in the space to actually actively go and pursue that collaboration with the regulator. And I think this is going to be another core theme, overarching theme of Sibos this year is, the financial industry is only as strong as it is connected, which is, of course, why we have instances like Sibos, which is always an industry highlight. You mentioned there just at the end of your answer about key players in this space. Have you got any specific names or technologies or methodologies in mind that have really caught your eye this year?
Yes, there's a couple of models both within cryptocurrencies and then alternative ACH, which are making noise and that we're very interested or appreciative of. I would like to just highlight something on the last question and follow up with one of your comments that, and I think it's important to keep it in the context of Sibos in this sense, is this interoperability and this cooperation. Historically, and we saw this even before cross borders and just other areas of banking and with fintech, a lot of talking at each other rather than with each other. A lot of hype in the early years of fintech. Fintechs are going to substitute banks, and we have to be worried about that, and creating this almost animosity between players. We've picked up on that a bit in the crypto space, and again, I'd reinforce that I think there shouldn't be any patronizing or fear there. It really needs to be from both sides of the aisle of cooperation and interoperability. And in that sense, then moving on to your question in terms of what we've seen in terms of players and names in the crypto space, definitely building with stable coins and Stellar. What PayPal has been doing is very exciting, and they already have a groundswell of acceptance of payments, of wallet. They have many of the pieces already together. So I think they're going to be a very interesting player to keep watch of. And on the alternative to, say, SWIFT or a correspondent model, I call them alternative ACH models because they've basically created their pooled accounts, have their own API and monitoring systems. A couple of the companies that we know are making a lot of noise are the likes of Tunes, Dandelion, which is kind of sitting on top of RIA and VIA and is now owned by Euronet. I think they're very interesting because they have a physical footprint and a DNA which goes into the money transfer history, and I think they've got maybe 150 countries or something like that. Other players which are interesting also, and I think have been flying under the radar but are becoming more active in expanding is a player like Uniteller. We've been familiar with given the investment by Banorte in Latin America here in Mexico, but we're seeing them more and more active as well. So I think these types of players are going to be interesting players and models as well to keep track of, because they're going to be allowing more banks to offer white label embedded solutions, which in turn will not only improve the efficiency of the experience of cross-border transfers and the cost of transborder transfers for the banks themselves, but I think we're going to start seeing the ability and new use cases with companies, with SMEs and end users benefiting from that integration.
I really like all of the names that you've brought out there, and for various reasons too. PayPal especially, I remember covering the launch of their stablecoin in August last year, the PayPal USD. Really exciting use cases with that emerging out, and of course with all these other players that you've mentioned, Tune sort of flying under the radar. And I really think, if we were to have this conversation this time next year, we might see those sorts of players emerge as sort of a dark horse in this race. And I really do hope so. I think it will do well for the market, and first and foremost, it will do well for the consumer as well, and businesses looking to make cross-border payments. This has been a really fascinating conversation, Jan. With Sibos just around the corner, aside from cross-border payments and those sorts of technologies, what other concepts or technologies will you be looking out for at Sibos this year?
Well, the flavor of the year has definitely been artificial intelligence, but I think we're definitely interested in following that. But more than anything, we're very interested in understanding what the investment pressures for some of the fintechs are, because behind this curtain of innovation and advancement, we do have pressures, and we're seeing this in terms of funding beginning to dry up. We're seeing less appetite in markets for going public. And so we're going to be very interested in following up with some of the innovative players and understanding where their funding is and what their needs are. Because if that dries up or that becomes a point of pain, then this whole cycle of innovation, I think, is going to suffer for it. So those are going to be some of the questions and answers that we're going to be looking for in the halls and kind of the rumor mill at Sibos. In addition to that, what we're looking at is the advancement of these regional real-time networks and really understanding how much political will is being put into it, understanding who's going to be or how the issues of governance are going to be solved. That is perhaps for us the biggest impediment for a faster rollout or for a smoother one. So we're going to be very interested to see, particularly with Nexus and players there, how that's being resolved.
Yes, everything starts with the funding, doesn't it? I find all levels of innovation need to be funded, and especially with the real-time payment networks. I think that'll be really interesting. FinTech Futures is going to be covering the event remotely this year, so I'll definitely have your words echoing in the back of my mind when I'm writing my coverage for the event. And yes, we shall definitely see how it plays out in Beijing this year. But Jan Smith, the co-founder and managing director of KoreFusion, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been a real pleasure to interview you and to learn more about your company. Thank you for the great conversation. And thank you also to everybody online who has followed this conversation with me and Jan. If you'd like to find out more about KoreFusion or about Sibos 2024 in Beijing, then please head over to fintechfutures.com. Otherwise, until next time, goodbye.